Hello everyone, thanks for joining us for another edition of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. I'm Jim Cardle. We're beginning to enter the fall season where candidates file for re-election, and State Representative Tan Parker, as chairman of the House Republican Caucus here in Austin, knows what was accomplished or what wasn't, and what issues candidates will be running on. Whether Hurricane Harvey relief, the budget, pro-life issues, sanctuary cities, voter ID, you name it, there's more than enough to cover with State Representative Tan Parker from House District 63 and chairman of the House Republican Caucus. Well, Tan Parker from House District 63 and chairman of the House Republican Caucus, we appreciate you joining us today.
Jim, an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I know you've got a number of events to go to as chairman of the caucus, as I mentioned, but I want to jump right in and get after some of the issues because you all did so much during this legislative session. We can't cover it all, but let's delve into the legislative session and the impact you all are having. A lot of analysts this last session said it was again a perhaps fourth in a row conservative session, most conservative session. There's been a string of conservative sessions going on, and you've been a big part of that. But let's start with an overall perspective before we get into the budget or sanctuary cities or abortion. Just generally, what was the mood of the legislature, and what would you perhaps pick out as one or two of the biggest accomplishments maybe?
Well, Jim, look, we came in obviously in January focused and ready to get to work. And I believe that, as you said, we had some extraordinary conservative successes. It really has been a string of successive, if you will, conservative sessions that I've been so blessed to have a privilege of being able to serve and be a part of. But I'll tell you, it really starts with the budget. At the end of the day, the single thing that constitutionally we are mandated to do is to pass a budget. And I'm very, very proud of the work that we did in both bodies. Senator Nelson certainly did a wonderful job. Obviously, my good friend, Chairman Zerwas, did a wonderful job on the House side as our two leading appropriators. Mm-hmm. And they worked together beautifully, and we really crafted a beautiful budget that we're very proud of. When you think about it for just a minute, that we spent $200 million less of the people's money in this biennium going forward than we did in the previous biennium, but yet our population grew by 1 million people. Plus, Jim, you've got to account for some degree of monetary inflation. You pick your number, 3, 4, 5%, whatever it may be. It's really pretty extraordinary what we're able to do. But I want folks to know that not only were we lean on the budget, but we also were able to live up to our key priorities and to continue to invest in important infrastructure for Texas to keep us healthy. And the challenge we had coming into the session was that we had a real shortfall.
And folks need to know that. I believe the numbers you're talking about were $216.4 billion to $216.2 billion or something like that, the decrease. But the 2016 economy had been going sideways. You all did have a challenge.
Well, that's exactly right. So we came in again in January, we're ready to get to work. But the reality is that everybody forgets about this, but we had the two looming crises. The economic crisis, so to speak, we're concerned about, was the fact that the price of oil had obviously dramatically fallen from the time we were previously in session. So that really was giving us a hole that we had to fill. And the other real crisis, if you will, and of course I give the governor tremendous accolades for his leadership on this issue, making an emergency item, the fixing of CPS. At the end of the day, taking care of our most vulnerable, taking care of our babies that are in the custody of the state was the most extraordinarily important thing we could do.
You're talking about Child Protective Services when you say CPS.
That's exactly right. And what we did there specifically is we created really the Department of Family and Protective Services as a standalone unit outside of Health and Human Services. We put in obviously a lot of additional money and a whole lot of additional caseworkers. So we did that actually starting before session began in December, knowing what was taking place. We actually started immediately adding hundreds and hundreds of new caseworkers and taking care of those folks better, but also making structural reform possible. We in total passed about 4 major bills that fixed the CPS system as we know it. And they, I think, will make a huge difference in the lives of these precious children that are enshrined to our custody, if you will, in the state of Texas.
Okay, you ticked off one or two of the issues here on my list pretty quickly. Let's move to perhaps one or two others. You're talking about 7,000 plus bills, for those who don't follow it as closely as some of us here in Austin, introduced in the legislature. You all winnow them down. But two other issues that involve children are the sanctuary cities and the abortion pro-life issue. Let's start first with the pro-life issue, if you can. I know many thought this was the most sweeping, or analyzed it as the most sweeping session in a number of years. Talk about what you see the highlights there, if you can.
No, absolutely, Jim. Well, look, I mean, if there's an issue that I've been passionate about all my life, it's the issue of the right to life and growing and promoting a culture of life in this state and in this country. I've been passionate about since I was an 18-year-old kid, going to my first March for Life back in Washington, D.C.
As a young Republican, I just learned before going on the air. That's right.
That's right. But the bottom line is that when you see what we're able to do, we passed some extraordinary bills. So one, obviously dealing with partial birth abortion and ending that horrific practice was just an incredibly positive thing for us to do.
You're talking about dismemberment, third trimester.
Absolutely,
abortions.
dismemberment as well. All of those horrific practices that have been allowed for too long, we put a stop to in Texas. So I'm very, very proud of that. I'm also very proud of the fact that we stopped the funding of Planned Parenthood. That was also extraordinary and a thing that we've wanted to do as conservatives in Texas and frankly across the country for a long, long time, Jim. So I'm delighted about that. And I'm also thrilled because it's important that we promote a culture of life from natural conception to natural death, and that we take care of people appropriately along the way. And so when you see what we were able to do with regard to alternatives to abortion, it's so important that we put additional money into that bucket as well. An additional $20 million is in the budget specifically addressing that issue. So when you see the bills that passed, coupled with the extraordinarily pro-life budget, the most pro-life budget, and certainly in my time in the legislature that we've ever passed, I feel wonderfully encouraged about our ability to continue to be successful in being able to advance the culture of life in every way possible.
Let me ask you particularly about the defunding of Planned Parenthood. There's been a lot of confusion. Some folks focus on Congress in Washington, D.C., what the Trump administration has or hasn't been able to do. Most of the funds get block granted to states. You're referring to what you all have done. Talk, if you can, or break it down and drill into the process. When you say defunding, tell us exactly what you're talking about there within the budget.
Sure. So, Jim, it's real simple. I mean, we're really talking about state dollars, right? Pure and simple. So we're not talking about federal money. We're talking about state dollars, and that state dollars are not going to be utilized in that capacity, right? We want to take care of women's health care. It's very important that the people of Texas know that Republicans care about Texas women, and we want Texas women to be strong and healthy and vibrant. We want to provide real health care options, not abortion services. And so we have blocked specifically those state dollars, but doing everything in our power to be able to expand traditional healthcare options, if you will. And also, as I said earlier, that additional $20 million we added to alternatives to abortion as well.
Okay, let's keep going and get into another issue or two. Folks, I want to first thank you for, again, joining us for this edition of Texas Insider TV. We're pleased to be able to visit today with State Representative Tan Parker from Flower Mound and House District 63 outside of the DFW Metroplex, and also Chairman of the House Republican Caucus. Representative, I've got a list here. We've talked about the budget. We've talked about abortion. There's American law for American courts, mail-in ballot fraud, border security. You all saved the Dallas and the Houston fire and police pensions, which were about to go bankrupt. We've talked about CPS reform, texting while driving, student-teacher relationships. How about voter ID in sanctuary cities? Those were big issues.
Enormous issues. I mean, the list you went through is obviously an incredibly long list of major accomplishments for the legislature as a whole that both the House and the Senate accomplished working together. But look, sanctuary cities is something that we wanted to get done for a long time. There's obviously been concerns that we've had as Republicans and as conservatives for years with the fact that, we weren't really enforcing immigration law in this country properly. And that we needed as a state to step up and do more with regard to specifically these sanctuary cities. So I'm delighted that we were able to pass that bill. It was a very strong sanctuary cities bill that I think will be the model for the country.
And some looked at what you all introduced in the House and what was moving through the Senate and said the House was a little bit more stringent bill. Is that what, in the end of the day, carried?
Yeah, look, I don't want to get into one versus the other per se, but there's no question about the fact that the House bill was extraordinarily strong, no question about it, and one that, like I said, I think will now be the model. Obviously, the Senate accepted what we did in the House. And now that bill obviously is the model, not just for Texas, but for the country.
Okay.
The challenge that we now face is, we have these liberal judges that have been very aggressive in trying to block several of our major pieces of legislation. My perspective on that is that once they get to the Fifth Circuit, they'll be corrected, or certainly ultimately to the Supreme Court. Having that additional new justice in Neil Gorsuch is an extraordinary blessing to Texas and to the country, and it obviously just shows why the presidential election of Donald Trump was so important last year as well. So it's all kind of interconnected, but again, I'm very proud of what we did with regard to sanctuary cities. It's a great bill. I'm also very proud of what we did with regard to voter ID. Voter ID was something we passed historically. We had to come back and had to make some improvements to it. And I think we did a super job of that. I'm very pleased with the work of the body and getting that done as well.
Address, I guess, some of the constitutionality or not. It had been in the courts, but now there is a series of 4 or 5 or 7, perhaps, IDs that are required. It is still the case that it's fairly easy to vote, I think, in Texas, correct?
No question. Look, we thought we put in place a very good law from the beginning, a couple years ago. But the reality is that we wanted to be responsive to what the courts were asking us to do. And so we did that. And the bill is very strong, very appropriate, absolutely in alignment with constitutional principles, and something that needs to go forward. I mean, for heaven's sake, I used a driver's license today to be able to go to pick up my dry cleaning and to be able to go on board an airplane. I mean,
really?
it shouldn't be too much. That's the same thing to go and vote. Such a precious freedom that we all enjoy, Jim.
Okay. Well, I control my smile on you picking up your dry cleaning. I'm going to transition to, I've got 2 final questions. I do want to ask you about Hurricane Harvey's impact on the state, perhaps. But before that, talk about, if you can, the mail-in ballot fraud issue. That is a issue that is related to voter ID. It's something that I know you've seen in the DFW Metroplex in the news, where it's perhaps most prevalent. Is voter ID, ballot integrity, an issue that we need to be concerned about?
Look, I believe it is. I think it's not an issue that just singularly focuses on Texas by any means, or certain areas of our state. I think it's a nationwide issue focusing on this dynamic around ballot integrity. So, obviously as a result, we took this issue up during the session. I'm very proud with what we ultimately passed. There's obviously a give and take in the legislative process to get something that we're all comfortable with. But at the end of the day, we think that we advanced the ball very seriously in a very meaningful way with regard to being able to protect the integrity of that ballot and that process, which is the fundamentals of our country and our democracy. So, at the end of the day, making certain that we have ballot integrity, making certain that we have voter ID, making certain that we have sanctuary cities, making certain that we address an issue as profound and folks were so concerned with. We all were very concerned with this issue of American law for American courts. I think also was very appropriate that we as a legislative body took that issue up this session, along with the litany of other things that we did, right? So I really believe that we had an excellent conservative session on so many fronts. Like I said, we talked about the budget. We talked about what we did on these other items a moment ago. We also continued in that budget not only to fund our priorities with regard to transportation and increasing enrollment for public schools and continuing Texas grants for our universities and so forth, but we also continue to invest and fund border security. Now, that is one particular investment that in time will transition to the federal government and to the federal government taxpayer. So it won't be borne exclusively by the Texas taxpayer. So I'm very encouraged by the fact that that obligation that we've had to pick up over the years, because frankly, Washington turned a blind eye and a deaf ear to this critical problem that is all about the protection of all of us, Jim. I mean, it doesn't matter, you're just talking about South Texas, it's North Texas, it's the whole nation that Texas served as a protective border, if you will. A protective border was so critical to protecting us all in our general safety. So I just think those have been very prudent, good decisions. We've acted, I think, in a way that we were good stewards of the people's money. But going forward, when it comes to border security, that will be picked up by the federal government.
Okay, I've got one final question prior to you coming in today, I've noticed not Tan Parker, the chairman of the House Republican Caucus, or Tan Parker from House District 63. There was Tan Parker, the citizen, in a Peterbilt truck on his way down to the coast delivering supplies for recovery efforts in Hurricane Harvey. Talk a little bit about what you've seen, maybe from your fellow legislators, from the governor. How have you seen that impact Texas and the response?
No, Jim, look, thank you. This is obviously the dominant issue of today currently, is how do we take care of our fellow Texans? How do we rebuild Texas going forward? I'm so proud of our governor. I think the governor's had extraordinary leadership. We've had great leadership from the top of the state all the way down to the county level, the municipal level. It's extraordinary. You know, on my visits down there, I've had the privilege of being side by side, seeing the governor in action, and working with the Jefferson County judge in Beaumont and the mayor of Beaumont, and talking about what they need to recover and to rebuild. And to see him in action has been truly extraordinary, and what he's put in place with Chancellor Sharp now to be able to be our singular point of focus, I think is just spectacular. And I just am so pleased with all that's taking place. My fellow colleagues in the House have been doing extraordinary things. We as a caucus will continue to do more. My big message out there, Jim, frankly, is that this is not going to be a sprint. It's a marathon, and we need to be continuously focused on serving our fellow Texans and giving them the resources they need to be successful. Because it won't be a matter of months. I wish it would be. It's realistically going to be a couple of years until we rebuild Southeast Texas, Beaumont, Rockport, Corpus Christi, Houston itself, the whole area. And we'll build it not only as great as it was before, it'll be better than it was in the past. And that's because Texans care about Texas, and we will work together. And we've had such incredible outpouring of support from around the country. Mm-hmm. And I also will tell you that the president has done an extraordinary job. So has FEMA, all the leadership from the federal level to the state level on down. It's just been awesome. And to see my fellow colleagues in the House helping one another, to going down to these affected areas and helping, it's just been fantastic to see. So it was my privilege that myself and my fellow Denton County colleagues, we raised supplies, if you will, on a couple of different occasions. And I had the privilege of taking all those supplies with our dear friends at Peterbilt that provided these beautiful vehicles to go down and deliver down to these areas that are so affected. And just yesterday, going back again, you know, I was there in Port Arthur. And I just saw specifically, again, just how horrible the devastation is. Mm-hmm. It's so much worse than what you even recognize on television.
Really?
And being throughout the entire area now, I'll tell you that Port Arthur, in my mind, from what I'm seeing, looks as badly hit as anything. But we just got to continue to be aggressive and proactive and helping in whatever way possible. And of course, as you just pointed out, Jim, it will be the defining issue, I think, of the interim, mm-hmm. as we then prepare for the next session and talk about what it will take, obviously, to get Texas back on its feet. We obviously have a large bill that will be taken care of by private insurance companies. Mm-hmm. We know that Washington, obviously, has acted very rapidly with its initial tranche of capital. And I'm delighted with what we're doing in Texas and in Washington with regard to finding a way to ease the bureaucratic strings, to make those dollars flow more smoothly, more rapidly to those people that are affected there on the ground. So I'm delighted with the whole outfit, the whole process. Everyone that's been a part of this process has done just an extraordinary job. I'm so proud to be a Texan. And I think our Lieutenant Governor sums it up best. You know, during this crisis, we're not Republicans, we're not Democrats, we are Texans, and we are Texans taking care of Texans. Anything else is secondary at this time and needs to be until we rebuild Texas the way it needs to be.
Appreciate you joining us for this issue of Texas Insider with House Republican Caucus Chairman Tan Parker from House District 63. We hope you'll come back and visit with us again.
Be honored anytime. Thank you, Jim, so much.
Remember, folks, you're either an insider or you're not. I'm Jim Cardle. Thanks for joining us.